What are some of the characteristics of the Leica M3? Well, the Leica M3 cut. Hello, and welcome to my channel. I'm Charles Abels, local photographer in and around Prescott Valley, Arizona. I hope you enjoy this presentation. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Today what I'm going to talk about is the Leica M3. This is the first camera manufactured, or let me rephrase that. The Leica M3 is the first camera that Leica produced in the M series of M's. Yeah. The M3 was released in 1954, and I believe the production was terminated, of the M3 was terminated in 1966. As a matter of fact, if you give me a moment, I happen to have here a book, and I could share, based on the book, a much more accurate. The Leica M3 was produced between 1954 and 1966. All right, I want to keep this open because I want to use this as my cheat sheet, as opposed to an actual cheat sheet. I want to use this book of reference. For many, the Leica M3, they would say, is the best of all the M series film cameras. And I am sure there will be those that would argue that it's even better, the best and better than the digital, all the way up to the Leica M11. What are some of the characteristics of the Leica M3? The viewfinder frames, the permanent is a 50 millimeter, which means when you look through the viewfinder, you'll see an outline in there, and the outlines are basically set to different focal lengths of the lenses. So the permanent frame that you see in the viewfinder is at 50 millimeter, and then it's selective at 90 and 135 millimeter. Then you could also add a 35 millimeter, which had a ocular, what they call an ocular, or common term is goggles for the 35 millimeter, which then would have the frame line for the 35 millimeter. So what that means is, as an example on the set, this is one of my 50 millimeter lenses. This is what I use with the Leica M3. When I mount that on there, I will always have that 50 millimeter, the 50 millimeter lines that I can compose my photograph. In addition to that, the Leica M3, when you mount a 90 millimeter lens on it, or a 135 millimeter lens on it, it will automatically come up with the frame lines to assist you in composing your photographs. The 35 millimeter, which happens to be my favorite focal length, when they were mounted, or when they were used for the Leica M3, they had to set it up like so. And then when you mount it, you have your viewfinder side right here. and it automatically came up with the frame lines for a 35 millimeter. Yeah, today's standard, it's considered a bit of a long drawn out process in order to change to the lens that you want to use. But at the time, with the M mount, these lenses and the camera, they were designed to be able to remove and put on another lens quickly. The shutter speeds. The shutter speed, here's the shutter speed knob. And it's everything down from a bulb, which means when you place the shutter release cable here, bulb, you press that shutter release, the shutter will stay open. So you can count 1001, 1002, 1003, and then release. So we have a bulb all the way up to 1/1000th of a second. And you adjust it right here. Now what's great about this is, unlike its older cameras, you don't need to advance the film. You can just go ahead and make the adjustments. The exposure counter resets in 2 divisions below 0. Now, what that means is this had an automatic reset for the film count. When you pop open the bottom, you load your film or your exposure number right here would drop down to 2, -2. And then what was great about that is when you set that up, you advance, hit the shutter for 1, advance, hit the shutter for 2, and then your camera is ready on 0. Now, what I didn't neglect to mention is, on the older models of the M3, we have, what's the term I'm thinking of? You have to advance the lever here twice to go 1 frame. And then the later version, I believe it started in 1958, all you had to do then was crank once, and then it advanced it fully to the next frame. So yeah, you had a double, fundamentally you had yourself a double advance on this model and older, and a single advance on the later models, where you crank the lever once or you crank the lever twice. This one I have to remind myself of that, because I know I'm to crank it once and then it wouldn't fire off until I cranked it the second time to get it where it fully advanced to the frame. It does have, of all things, a self-timer right here. That's pretty cool, except for one thing. I generally don't take a self-portrait often, but it's there nevertheless. We're going to go ad lib right now, so I'm going to put the book off to the side. Let me highlight some of the rest. It does have a tripod mount. This particular tripod mount, though, is a 3/8 inch, which means it's primarily, this camera was initially primarily marketed for the European market. You have your base plate knob here to remove the base plate to load up the film. You have your film release, again, where you push it down to R to release everything internally for you to rewind the film once you're done. Now this thing is pretty cool. This is a frame line selector. Now, the selector through the viewfinder is set up on 50 millimeter focal length. But if you were to use this, you could set it up and then you could select either side. One is for the 90 millimeter, the other is for 135 millimeter. And what's great about this is you could sit there and try either one. Let's say, for instance, you throw the 50 on there. You're not quite happy with your composition, so you want to go to the 90 millimeter. Why? Because you have a 90 millimeter lens right here that you could swap out quickly to get your composition. Then again, you may throw it on there and say, I'm not necessarily happy with that. I'm going to throw on and check the frame line with the 135. Therefore, you could look through the viewfinder and make a determination on what you want to use when you create your composition. I know. It's awesome, isn't it? However, it will, and it could take time, especially if you're in an endeavor where you're out there taking street photography, say, where you just simply don't have time to check. You're going to lose the moment. You're going to lose everything about it. So that's the one disadvantage with this, but it could be also helpful. On the back side here, this is, I like to call it my ASA reminder wheel. So you can put, as an example, I shot 400 ASA film, Kodak Tri-X 400 ASA. And so with this, I can just push it over to 400 and it reminds me what I have in the camera. So that way I know how to create it with the composition when it comes to exposure and aperture. Very remarkable. On the top side here, we know we got our film count. We have our shutter right here. I have a soft button on here. I generally don't use a shutter release cable because frankly, I don't generally shoot low light shooting mostly like I do with my digital. So, but I love the soft shutter button up top side. We have our film advance here, our shutter speed here, and this is our rewind knob. Now we have to remember when we shoot all our film exposure, we hit the release button in the front in order to rewind. Back here, this is something I've not used. This is something I'm not really familiar, and I'm talking about both film and digital. I very rarely use flash or anything relating to flash, but nevertheless, here are the flash ports back here. Oh, and I neglected to mention, that's the viewfinder right there. And because it is an M mount, you have this release button here so you can take your M mount. The neat thing about it is it's recessed in a protective sleeve here, so that way you don't accidentally hit it to loosen up the M mount lens. That's fundamentally it. This camera is phenomenal. It's fun to shoot. And right now, I'm going to share some photos that I've taken with this camera. For the last couple of days, I burned up a roll of Kodak Tri-X 400 film. Took photographs in Prescott Valley. Took photographs in what was once near the ghost town or town of McCabe. And then photographs in and around the Humboldt area that I'm going to share with you. So I hope you enjoy those photographs. presently I'm at the McCabe Cemetery. Down the road a bit that I just came up is the ghost town site of McCabe in Arizona. It's a mining camp. It's near Humboldt, Arizona. And I decided to finish off the roll of film traipsing around the Humboldt, Dewey area, and I thought I would swing by or swing up here to McCabe and see my old stomping grounds from 50 years ago when I was a kid growing up in this neck of the woods. Yeah, this was the area where the McCabe mine operated. I want to say in the earliest of 20th century. I don't even remember the exact date. We'll say somewhere between 1910 and or 1900s to the 1920s. With that, I hope you enjoyed my presentation here. I hope you enjoyed my black and white photographs. Not perfect, grainy perhaps, but nevertheless fun to shoot and developed. And please don't forget to subscribe down below. And so until next time, we'll catch you later.